parking garage's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Betty's face as she backed away, pulse racing. Daniel's footsteps echoed against concrete, each step deliberate, predatory. "You think you can ignore my calls?" His voice bounced off the low ceiling, amplifying the threat. Her eyes darted frantically across the empty level. That's when she saw it. A black Mercedes S-Class, engine purring, a man visible through the half-open door. Dark hair, sharp features, danger wrapped in an immaculate white shirt with the top buttons undone. Without thinking, Betty broke into a run and did the unthinkable. She threw herself into the car, landing directly on the stranger's lap. His body went rigid beneath her, muscles tensing like a drawn bowstring. She felt his breath against her temple, felt the deadly stillness radiating from him. "This is either desperation," he murmured, his voice carrying a slight accent, smooth as aged whiskey but cold as winter, "or insanity. Which is it?" Daniel appeared in the garage entrance, rage distorting his features. The stranger's hand settled on Betty's waist, present, solid, claiming. "Breathe," he commanded quietly. "And tell me very quickly. Should I have my men remove him, or do you prefer I handle this personally?" Men? Who the hell had she just thrown herself at? Thank you for sticking around with me, my wonderful story family. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story, just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. Betty Gonzalez had learned early that survival meant staying small. At 28, she'd perfected invisibility, a skill that served her well in downtown Los Angeles, where rent devoured paychecks and dreams died in studio apartments with broken air conditioning. The gallery opening wasn't her scene, but her friend Jasmine had insisted, practically dragging her out of her apartment. "You need this," Jasmine had said, zipping up the burgundy wrap dress Betty never wore. "6 months of hiding is enough. Daniel doesn't get to keep you prisoner in your own life." Except Daniel hadn't received that message. She'd spotted him immediately in the parking garage, stomach plummeting. He'd been waiting, leaning against his car with that smile that used to make her feel special, but now made her skin crawl. She'd turned toward the elevator. That had been her first mistake. Her second mistake had been thinking she could outrun him. Now, perched on a dangerous stranger's lap with Daniel stalking closer, Betty realized she'd just made a third mistake. Possibly a fatal one. "Betty?" Daniel's voice sliced through the tension. "Get out of that car. Now." The stranger's thumb moved in a slow circle against her hip, reassuring, grounding. "Stay calm," he murmured. "I have this. You're safe." "I think," the stranger said, voice carrying effortlessly despite not being raised. "The lady is exactly where she wants to be." Bradley Smith had been having a perfectly mundane evening until a woman dropped onto his lap, like a grenade with the pin pulled. She was striking, deep brown skin, natural hair slicked back into a low bun that emphasized elegant cheekbones and full lips that trembled slightly. But her eyes arrested him. Dark brown, filled with terror and defiance he recognized too well. The approaching man was exactly the type Bradley despised. Large, entitled, using physical presence to intimidate. "Do you know who I am?" Bradley asked conversationally, his accent barely noticeable but deliberately present. Daniel faltered. "Man, I don't care who you are. That's my girlfriend." "I'm not your girlfriend." Betty's voice rang clear, stronger than Bradley expected. "I haven't been for 6 months. Leave me alone." "Your girlfriend appears to disagree," Bradley interrupted smoothly. "And since she's currently sitting on my lap, I'm inclined to believe her version of events." He let his expression go arctic. "Walk away while you still can." The threat hung in the air like cordite after a gunshot. Bradley's men materialized from the shadows, Jae, Minho, Dae-jung, all watching Daniel like wolves measuring prey. Daniel's bravado cracked. "This isn't over. It is over." Bradley's voice could freeze flames. "If I see you approach her again, if I even hear you've been in the same neighborhood, I will consider that a personal insult." He paused, letting the words settle. "Do you understand what happens to people who insult me?" Daniel stumbled backward, hands raised, before disappearing into the garage stairwell. Betty exhaled shakily, reality crashing in. She was sitting on a stranger's lap, a stranger who'd threatened her ex with surgical precision, surrounded by men who looked like they buried problems in the desert. "Oh God," she breathed. "I'm so sorry. I wasn't thinking. She tried to stand, but his hand tightened fractionally, not painful, requesting. "Stay," he said quietly, "at least until we're certain he's actually left." Betty's legs stopped obeying her. She became acutely aware of everywhere they touched, solid muscle beneath her, warmth bleeding through her dress, his breath moving the loose tendrils of hair at her neck. "I'm Betty," she said finally, "and I think I might have just made the biggest mistake of my life." His lips curved slightly. "Bradley. And that depends entirely on what you do next." The rational part of Betty's brain screamed at her to run. Men with this kind of power were dangerous. But the rest of her, exhausted from being afraid, tired of being hunted, was transfixed. "You can let me go now," she said. "He's gone." "Your friend left 20 minutes ago," Bradley informed her. "The woman in the silver heels, very loud laugh, left with someone in a red Audi." Her stomach sank. Of course Jasmine had left. She checked her phone, 11:47 p.m. No messages. Her bank account couldn't handle an Uber from this neighborhood. "I'll have my driver take you home," Bradley said, making it clear this wasn't negotiable. "I don't accept rides from strangers." "We're not strangers," he countered, something almost like amusement flickering in his dark eyes. "You've been sitting on my lap for 10 minutes. I know you wear vanilla perfume, bite your lip when you're nervous, and keep glancing at the exit every 15 seconds. He paused. "I'd say we're acquainted." Despite everything, Betty's mouth twitched. "That's not how that works." He shifted slightly, making her hyper-aware of every point of contact. "You also know I dislike men who terrorize women, that I have resources you clearly need, and that I'm offering help with no strings attached." His gaze held hers. "Unless you'd prefer to risk that he's waiting by your car." He'd noticed she'd been calculating escape routes. Why was he helping her? "Why are you doing this?" "Are you a scam artist who throws herself at powerful men?" he asked, one eyebrow raised. "No, I'm a graphic designer who made a very impulsive decision." "Then we have our answer." He finally released her waist. "My driver is Park. He's been with me for 7 years, married, grandfather of 3. He'll take you directly to whatever address you provide." His eyes locked with hers. "Or you can take your chances that your ex has actually left." The second option made her decision. "Thank you," Betty said, standing on unsteady legs. She immediately missed his solid warmth. Bradley stood. She had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, and pulled out a matte black card with silver embossing. He held it between 2 fingers. In case he doesn't take the hint. The card read simply, "Bradley Smith and a phone number." Nothing else. "I won't need this," Betty said, slipping it into her clutch anyway. "We'll see," Bradley replied, and something in his tone suggested he saw futures she couldn't yet imagine. Park drove with quiet professionalism. Betty leaned against the cool window, thoughts spiraling. She should feel relieved. Instead, she felt like she'd stepped onto train tracks and couldn't hear the engine yet. Her phone buzzed. Jasmine. "OMG, babe, where are you? The gallery guy is so into you," Betty typed back. "Got a ride. Talk tomorrow." What she didn't text. "I just sat on a dangerous man's lap, and he looked at me like I mattered instead of like I was breakable, and I can't stop replaying his voice saying, "You're safe." 5 days later, Betty was working on a logo redesign at the brew house, her usual coffee shop, when Daniel walked through the door. Her fingers froze over her keyboard. Her latte tipped, spreading across her notes like blood in water. Daniel's smile was all menace. "Found you, Betts. Thought we should talk." Marissa, the owner, looked up from the register. "Everything okay here?" "He was just leaving," Betty said, voice steadier than her hands. "That's not very friendly, mi amor," Daniel drawled, using the endearment she'd once loved and now hated. "I came all this way." Marissa reached for her phone. "I'm calling the police." "For what? Ordering coffee?" Daniel spread his hands. "Public place. I can drink coffee wherever I want." He was right. Unless he made a direct threat, there was nothing anyone could do. Betty's hand found the black card. She'd looked at it maybe 50 times in 5 days. Memorized the number but never called. She pulled out her phone and typed a single message. "He found me." The response came in 45 seconds. Address. 12 minutes later, 2 black SUVs pulled up outside the brew house. Bradley Smith walked through the door like he owned the city. Bradley dealt with Daniel in under 3 minutes. Betty watched through the coffee shop window as he spoke. Calm, measured, terrifying in his control. Daniel's face went from red to white to gray. When Bradley's men stepped forward, Daniel practically sprinted to his car. Bradley returned inside, adjusting his cufflinks like he'd just finished a business meeting, rather than dismantling a man's ego. "Pack your things," he said to Betty. "You're not staying here?" "I have work. Marissa." Bradley turned to the owner, pulling out his wallet. "How much for her time today?" Marissa blinked. What?" "Name a price. I'm taking her somewhere safe." 20 minutes later, Betty sat in the back of Bradley's Mercedes, her laptop bag clutched against her chest like a shield. Park drove with the same quiet efficiency as before. Bradley sat beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, cedar and something darker, expensive. "You didn't have to pay her $300, Betty said. "I did if I wanted to leave without argument." He glanced at her. "You're shaking." She was. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving her hollow and cold. "I thought I was done being afraid of him." "You will be." It wasn't a promise. It was a statement of fact. They pulled up to her building in Koreatown, a 5-story walk-up with peeling paint and a security door that hadn't locked properly in 2 years. Betty saw Bradley's jaw tighten as he took in the broken intercom, the graffiti on the mailboxes, the flickering hallway light. "You don't have to walk me up," she said quickly. "I'll be fine." He was already out of the car. Betty's studio was on the 3rd floor. She was hyper-aware of every detail as they climbed the stairs, the stain on the 2nd floor landing, the smell of someone's cooking, the way her key stuck in the lock because the mechanism was warped. Inside, her apartment was exactly what it was. 28 years of struggle compressed into 400 square feet. The kitchen was a hot plate and a mini fridge. Her bed was a mattress on a frame she'd found on the street. Her office was a folding table positioned to catch the best light from the single window. Bradley stepped inside and closed the door behind him. He didn't comment on the lack of furniture or the water stain on the ceiling. He simply looked, really looked, at everything. His gaze landed on her desk, where her design portfolio lay open to a half-finished logo concept. A coffee company rebrand she'd been working on for a potential client who kept needing more time to review her proposals. He moved to the mini fridge, opened it. 1 container of yogurt, 3 days past expiration. A half-empty bottle of hot sauce, tap water in a reused plastic bottle. Betty's face burned. "I haven't had time to shop." "You don't need to explain." His voice was quiet. He closed the fridge and turned to face her. That's when she saw his expression had changed. Not pity, something sharper, more personal. Rage, carefully leashed. His eyes moved to the small pile of mail on her counter. She'd tried to bury the eviction notice under bills and junk mail, but somehow he found it, lifting the corner just enough to read the header. 3 days, he said. Betty's throat closed. I'm working on it. I have some invoices out. Betty. He said her name like it mattered. When were you going to tell someone? There's no one to tell. The words came out sharper than she intended. I handle my own problems? Bradley studied her for a long moment, then reached into his jacket and pulled out another card. This one was different, heavier stock, embossed with a logo she didn't recognize. This is my personal number, he said, holding it out. Not my office, not my assistant, me. She took it with numb fingers. If he comes back, Bradley continued, his eyes holding hers with unsettling intensity. You call me, not the police, not a friend, me. He stepped closer, and she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. Do you understand? Betty nodded. Say it. I'll call you. Good. Something in his expression softened fractionally. I meant what I said in the parking garage, Betty. You're under my protection now. He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the knob. Someone will deliver groceries tomorrow morning. Don't argue. Bradley. And pay your rent. He glanced back at her. Consider it an advance on the consulting work you're going to do for me. I don't. You will. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. I've seen your work. You're better than coffee shop freelancing. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Betty stood in her empty apartment, holding his card, trying to understand what had just happened. The man who'd threatened her ex-boyfriend with surgical precision had just seen every humiliating detail of her life, and hadn't flinched. She looked down at the card. The number was handwritten in bold, confident strokes. She should throw it away. She should run. Instead, she saved the number in her phone under a single letter. B, just in case. 5 days passed like a held breath. Betty told herself it had been a fever dream. The parking, garage, the dangerous man with careful hands, the promise of protection. Real life didn't work that way. Men like Bradley Smith didn't actually care about women like her, except the groceries arrived the next morning. Premium brands she never bought. Fresh produce that lasted more than 2 days. Coffee that didn't taste like burnt regret. No note, no explanation. And her rent. When she went to pay it, her landlord informed her someone had already handled it. 3 months in advance. Betty stared at Bradley's card every night and didn't call. She met Sarah Chen at the brew house on Thursday afternoon, a potential client looking for branding for her new wellness app. Sarah was exactly the kind of client Betty needed. Legitimate budget, clear vision, actual respect for design work. Betty had dressed carefully, worn the burgundy dress again because it was the only thing in her closet that said professional. She'd arrived early, ordered a green tea she couldn't afford, spread her portfolio across the table. Sarah was impressed. Betty could see it in the way she leaned forward, asking questions about typography choices and color psychology. This could be it. The project that moved Betty from survival to stability. Then the door chimed. Betty's spine went rigid before she even turned around. She knew that walk, that presence, the way the air shifted when Daniel entered a room. Betty? His voice carried across the coffee shop like a slap. We need to talk. Sarah's eyes widened. Is everything... It's fine, Betty said quickly, her professional voice cracking. Just give me a second. Daniel was already at their table, looming over them with that smile that used to charm her, and now made her stomach churn. Who's this? New friend? Daniel, leave. I've been calling you. He wasn't asking. He was accusing. You blocked my number, changed your shifts at that diner. Made me look like an idiot. I'm in a meeting. His hand shot out, fingers wrapping around her wrist like a vice. You don't walk away from me, Bets. The pressure was immediate, brutal. Betty gasped, trying to pull back, but his grip only tightened. Let go of her! Marissa shouted from behind the counter. Sarah was already standing, gathering her things. I'm sorry, Betty, this isn't… She was backing away, her face pale with horror. Sarah, please! But the potential client was already out the door. Daniel's grip loosened slightly, satisfaction flickering across his face. See what you made me do? Betty's hands were shaking so hard she could barely pull out her phone. The card was in her wallet, but she'd memorized the number days ago. She'd told herself she'd never use it. She typed with one trembling hand. Help, she hit send before she could second-guess herself. Daniel saw the screen. Who are you texting? You think someone's going to save you? The reply came in 10 seconds. Address Betty typed it with numb fingers. The Brewhouse, 4th and Vermont, 12 minutes. Daniel was still talking, his voice rising, drawing stares from other customers. Marissa was on the phone with the police, but Betty knew how this worked. By the time they arrived, Daniel would be gone or would claim it was a misunderstanding. Public place. No witnesses willing to get involved. She just needed to last 12 minutes. You're pathetic, Daniel was saying. You think you can just erase me? 6 years, Betty. You don't get to throw that away. The door opened. Bradley Smith walked in like a storm front, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Betty's monthly rent. He wasn't alone. 2 men flanked him, one tall and broad-shouldered with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, the other lean and cold-eyed, moving with predatory grace. The entire coffee shop went silent. Bradley's gaze found Betty first, swept over her wrist still caught in Daniel's grip, then lifted to Daniel's face. His expression didn't change, but something in the air shifted. Became dangerous. Remove your hand, Bradley said quietly, his accent more pronounced than Betty remembered. Or I will remove it for you. Daniel's bravado faltered, but he didn't let go. Who the hell? The scarred man moved. 1 second he was by the door, the next he was beside Daniel, hand clamped on his shoulder with enough force that Daniel's knees buckled. He said, the man's voice was pure gravel, let go. Daniel released Betty's wrist like it burned him. Bradley crossed the distance between them, his attention shifting to Marissa behind the counter. He pulled out his wallet, extracted 5 crisp $100 bills, and placed them on the counter. For the disturbance, he said calmly, and for any emotional distress this might have caused your establishment. Marissa stared at the money, then at Bradley, then nodded slowly. Bradley turned back to Daniel, and Betty watched his expression transform into something that made her blood run cold. He smiled, the kind of smile that had nothing to do with warmth and everything to do with threat. Now, Bradley said, his voice silk over razors, you and I are going to have a conversation outside. Daniel's swagger returned the moment they stepped into daylight. Look, man, I don't know who you think you are. Walk. Bradley's tone didn't rise, but Daniel moved. Betty pressed against the coffee shop window, watching them cross the parking lot. The scarred man, Jay, she'd learn later, flanked Daniel's left. The lean one covered his right. They moved like wolves herding prey. Bradley stopped beside one of the black SUVs. He adjusted his cufflinks with the same casual precision he'd used at her apartment, like violence was just another business transaction requiring proper presentation. Through the glass, Betty couldn't hear the words, but she could read the tableau. Bradley was speaking, his posture relaxed, almost friendly, one hand gesturing conversationally. Daniel was listening, his face cycling through emotions, like a slot machine. Confusion, anger, fear, denial, then fear again, deeper this time. Inside the coffee shop, Marissa had stopped pretending to work. 2 customers in the corner were recording on their phones. Betty wanted to look away, but couldn't. Bradley leaned closer to Daniel, still talking. Whatever he was saying made Daniel's face drain of color, his mouth forming the word "no" over and over. Betty's wrist throbbed where Daniel had grabbed her. She'd have bruises tomorrow, perfect finger-shaped shadows on her brown skin. Bradley straightened, said something else, then smiled. It was the same smile he'd worn inside. Beautiful and terrible, a promise wrapped in menace. He stepped back, nodded once. Jay and the other man moved in perfect synchronization. Each grabbed one of Daniel's arms. Daniel tried to pull away, but they might as well have been granite. They walked him, dragged him really, to the second SUV. The door opened. Daniel was guided inside with the kind of clinical efficiency that suggested they'd done this before. Many times. The door closed. The SUV pulled away. Bradley watched it go, then turned and walked back toward the coffee shop. His expression had already shifted back to something almost pleasant, like he'd just finished scheduling a dentist appointment instead of orchestrating whatever that was. Betty met him at the door, her heart hammering. What did you say to him? The truth. Bradley's hand found the small of her back, guiding her toward his Mercedes. Get in. I'm taking you somewhere safe. Bradley, what did you... I told him what would happen if he ever came near you again. His voice was calm, matter of fact. I was very specific. Park already had the engine running. Betty slid into the back seat, her mind racing. Bradley settled beside her, close enough that his cologne cut through her rising panic. Where are they taking him? Somewhere to think about his choices. Bradley pulled out his phone, typed something, then pocketed it. He'll be fine. Uncomfortable, but fine. The SUV glided into traffic. Betty's hands wouldn't stop shaking. I had a sister once, Bradley said quietly, his gaze fixed on something outside the window. Min-ji, she was 23 when she died, jumped from a hotel balcony downtown. Betty's breath caught. Bradley. She was with someone like Daniel. Someone who made her feel small, worthless. Someone who convinced her that the fear was love. His jaw tightened. I didn't see it until it was too late. She hid it well. We all did in my family. Hide things, I mean. It's cultural, you endure. He finally looked at her, and Betty saw something raw in his expression. When I saw your face in that parking garage, I saw hers. That same terror, that same desperation. He paused. I swore after Min-ji that I would never ignore those signs again. That I would never let another woman suffer because I was too polite to interfere. So you interfere, Betty whispered, aggressively. The corner of his mouth lifted, but there was no humor in it. Daniel will be driven to a bus station approximately 3 hours from here. His phone will be broken. My men will explain in detail what will happen to him if he returns to Los Angeles, if he contacts you, if he even speaks your name. And what will happen? Bradley's eyes held hers. He won't be, but he'll wish he were. The same words he'd said in the parking lot. Betty should have been horrified, should have demanded Park stop the car, should have run as far from Bradley Smith as possible. Instead, she felt safe for the first time in 6 months. You can't keep doing this, she said. But even she heard how weak the protest sounded. Watch me. Bradley pulled out another card, business card, embossed with a logo she now recognized from the groceries. This is the address for my property in Los Feliz. There's a guest house. Fully furnished, security system, gate with a guard. You're moving in tonight. Bradley, I can't. You can, and you will. His voice left no room for argument. Daniel won't come back. But I need to know you're somewhere safe while we ensure he understands the permanence of his departure. Betty looked down at the card. Los Feliz, She'd never been able to afford even visiting that neighborhood. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I can." He said it simply, like it was the only reason that mattered. "Because Minji didn't have someone who could. Because you threw yourself into a stranger's car instead of giving up." He leaned closer. "Because when I saw him touch you today, I wanted to break every bone in his hand, and that told me something." "What did it tell you?" Bradley's expression shifted into something she couldn't quite read. Possession, protection, something darker and more complicated. "That you're mine to protect now, whether you've accepted that yet or not." Betty moved into the guest house that evening with a single duffel bag of belongings. The property was exactly as Bradley described. A sprawling compound in Los Feliz, with walls high enough to keep out the world. The guest house alone was larger than any apartment she'd ever lived in, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a garden that looked Japanese in its careful simplicity. She spent the first hour just standing in the middle of the living room, afraid to touch anything. Bradley found her there at 7 p.m., still holding her duffel bag like a security blanket. "You haven't unpacked," he observed. "I'm still processing that this is real." His expression softened fractionally. "Come with me, you need to eat." "I'm not hungry." "You haven't eaten since breakfast." He said it with the certainty of someone who'd been paying attention to details she didn't think anyone noticed. "And I don't trust you to feed yourself yet." They took his Mercedes into Koreatown, pulling up to a restaurant Betty had walked past countless times. Jiangsu, a place with no English on the sign and a wait list that supposedly stretched months. The kind of place where you needed connections just to get a reservation. Bradley walked in like he owned it. Maybe he did. They were led to a private room in the back. Traditional low table with cushions, rice paper screens filtering soft light. The hostess bowed deeply before disappearing. Betty knelt awkwardly, her burgundy dress not designed for floor seating. Bradley settled across from her, with the grace of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. "You come here often?" she asked, trying for normalcy. "My mother used to bring Minji and me here when we were children, before she passed." He poured water into delicate cups. "It's one of the few places I still feel close to them." The admission hung between them, unexpectedly intimate. Food began arriving, banchan in small ceramic dishes, colors and textures Betty couldn't name. Then galbi, the meat sizzling on the tabletop grill, the smell rich enough to make her stomach clench with sudden hunger. Bradley served her first, his movements practiced and careful. "Eat." She did, and nearly moaned at the first bite. Real food, the kind that came from kitchens that cared about flavor instead of speed. "Tell me about her," Betty said. "Minji." Bradley's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. "She was the best of us, smart, kind, always trying to fix things. She wanted to be a social worker." He turned the meat with surgical precision. "She started dating someone her junior year at UCLA, someone we thought was good for her. Pre-med, from a good family. Polite. But he wasn't." "No." The word came out flat. "He was exactly like Daniel, charming in public, controlling in private. She started wearing long sleeves in summer, canceling family dinners, losing weight." His knuckles whitened around his chopsticks. "I noticed. I asked. She said she was fine, just stressed about school." Betty's throat tightened. "I wanted to believe her," Bradley continued. "It was easier than confronting what I suspected. Easier than admitting my little sister was being destroyed by someone I'd smiled at across dinner tables." "Bradley." She left him eventually. Got a restraining order. Moved back home. We thought it was over. He finally looked up, and Betty saw the guilt etched into every line of his face. 3 months later, she went to a hotel downtown, 14th floor, jumped. The room went silent except for the gentle sizzle of meat. The restraining order didn't stop him from calling her, from showing up at her work, from making her feel like she'd never be free. Bradley's voice was carefully controlled, each word measured. The police said she left a note, said she was tired of being afraid, that she couldn't live looking over her shoulder forever. Betty's eyes burned. I'm so sorry. I swore at her funeral that I would never ignore those signs again, that I would never let politeness or propriety stop me from protecting someone who needed it. He served her more meat, the gesture almost tender despite the heaviness of his words. When I saw your face in that parking garage, I saw hers. That same terror, that calculation of whether running was even worth it. So this is penance, Betty said quietly. This is purpose, he corrected. Minji died because no one with power chose to use it. I have power now, considerable power. I choose to use it differently. Betty understood then. She wasn't just a woman he was helping. She was his mission, his redemption, the sister he couldn't save rewritten with a different ending. It should have felt like pressure. Instead, it felt like being seen. I want to hire you, Bradley said, shifting gears with the smoothness of someone used to negotiating. My businesses need rebranding, legitimate rebranding. I need someone with your aesthetic sense and discretion. Bradley, I can't take charity. It's not charity. He pulled out his phone, showed her a number that made her vision blur. This is the monthly retainer for a creative consultant position. You'll rebrand my import company, design marketing materials, handle visual identity for my real estate holdings. The number had 5 figures. Monthly. That's insane, Betty whispered. That's market rate for someone of your caliber working exclusively for one client. His eyes held hers. I've seen your portfolio, Betty. You're worth 10 times what that wellness app would have paid you. She knew what this was. A leash made of gold, a cage with designer furniture. A way to keep her close, keep her safe, keep her dependent. She should say no. Yes, Betty heard herself say. I accept. Bradley's smile was small but genuine. Good, you start Monday. He raised his water glass. To new beginnings. Betty touched her glass to his, sealing a deal that had nothing to do with design work and everything to do with the way he looked at her across the table. Like she was worth protecting, worth keeping, worth the considerable weight of his dangerous attention. 2 weeks into her new life, Betty had almost convinced herself this could be normal. She worked from Bradley's home office during the day, redesigning logos and creating brand guidelines for companies with names that sounded legitimate. She ate meals that appeared without her asking. She slept in sheets that cost more than her old monthly rent. And every evening, Bradley came home. They'd fallen into a routine, dinner together, conversation that ranged from design theory to his childhood and soul, nights that ended with him walking her to the guest suite door and never crossing the threshold. It felt domestic, safe, almost real. Then his phone rang at 9:30 on a Thursday night. Betty was curled on his penthouse sofa, sketching logo concepts on her tablet. Bradley answered in Korean, his voice shifting into something clipped and cold. The conversation lasted 45 seconds. When he hung up, his expression had transformed into something she'd only seen once before, in that parking lot, looking at Daniel. I have to handle something, he said, already moving toward the door. You should stay here. I'll be back in a few hours. What kind of something? He paused, his hand on the doorframe. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then, the kind I've been shielding you from. Betty set down her tablet. Is it dangerous? Not for me. Then I want to come. Bradley turned fully, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Betty? You said you wouldn't lie to me, that you'd show me who you really are. She stood, meeting his gaze. So show me. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or respect. This isn't dinner in Koreatown. This isn't paying off your ex or buying groceries. His voice dropped. If you come with me tonight, you'll see things you can't unsee. You'll know things that make you complicit. I know. Do you? He crossed back to her, stopping close enough that she had to tilt her head to maintain eye contact. Because once you see what I really am, not the man who takes you to restaurants or holds your hand, but the man who built this empire, you don't get to unknow it. Betty's heart hammered against her ribs, but she didn't look away. I want to know. All of it. Bradley searched her face for something, then nodded once. Get your jacket. The warehouse in San Pedro looked abandoned from the outside. Rusted metal siding, broken windows, weeds pushing through cracked asphalt. 3 black SUVs were parked in the loading bay, engines still running. Jay met them at the entrance, his scarred face impassive. He said something to Bradley in Korean. Bradley responded, then glanced at Betty. Last chance, he said. Wait in the car. I won't think less of you. Betty walked past him into the warehouse. Inside smelled like rust and fear. Overhead lights flickered, casting harsh shadows across stacked shipping containers. Bradley's men formed a loose circle in the center of the space. 6 of them, all wearing the same dark suits, all watching a figure bound to a metal chair. The man was young, maybe 30, his face already swelling from what looked like a recent beating. His eyes went wide when he saw Bradley, and he started talking rapidly in Korean, the words tumbling over each other in desperation. Bradley listened without expression. Then he said something back, calm, almost gentle, that made the man start crying. What's he saying? Betty whispered. He's begging, Bradley said, explaining that he needed the money, that his mother is sick, that he didn't think anyone would notice 50,000 missing from a shipment. He stepped closer to the bound man. He's saying he'll pay it back. Will he? No. Bradley's voice was flat. He gambled it away in 3 days. He nodded to Jay. What happened next carved itself into Betty's memory with brutal clarity. Jay moved with clinical efficiency. No rage, no hesitation, just methodical violence, designed to teach a lesson. The sound of impact. The man's screams. The way Bradley's other men watched with the detachment of people who'd seen this before. Bradley didn't participate. He simply stood there, hands in his pockets, watching with an expression that could have been carved from ice. Betty's stomach churned. She wanted to look away, wanted to run, but she forced herself to watch. This was what she'd asked for, the truth behind the protection, the cost of safety. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, Bradley raised his hand. Jay stopped immediately. The man in the chair was sobbing, blood dripping from his mouth onto his shirt. Bradley knelt beside him, said something too quiet for Betty to hear. The man nodded frantically. Bradley stood, adjusted his cuffs, and walked back to Betty. We're done here. In the car, Betty's hands shook so violently she had to sit on them. Park drove in silence, eyes on the road, pretending not to notice. Bradley didn't try to touch her, didn't try to explain. He simply sat beside her, close enough to feel but not quite touching, waiting. Is he? Betty's voice cracked. Will he? He'll live, Bradley said quietly. He'll hurt for a few weeks, and he'll remember why you don't steal from me, but he'll live. And that's supposed to make it okay? No. Bradley finally looked at her. It's not okay. It's never okay. But it's necessary. He paused. In my world, mercy is calculated. You show too much, people think you're weak. You show too little, you become the monster. That man will walk away tonight. His family will be taken care of. But he'll never steal from me again, and everyone who hears about this will think twice before trying. Betty's throat burned. This is what you do. When people cross you. Yes. And Daniel. Got off easy because he hurt someone I care about, not someone who works for me. The calculus is different. Bradley's jaw tightened. I won't lie to you, Betty. I won't tell you I'm a good man doing bad things for good reasons. I'm a man who saw what happened when the world was allowed to be cruel to people I love, and I decided to be crueler first. Betty looked at him, really looked, and saw it all clearly now. The careful control, the measured violence, the way he'd inserted himself into her life with the precision of someone executing a strategy. He wasn't her savior. He was a predator who'd decided she was worth protecting from other predators. I should be horrified, she whispered. You should be. His voice was soft, almost sad. You should get out of this car, pack your things, and run as far from me as possible. But I'm not. The realization settled over her like a weight. I'm not horrified enough. Bradley's expression shifted into something complicated. Relief, maybe, or recognition. No, you're not. What does that make me? Mine, he said simply. It makes you mine. Betty lay in the guest suite bed at 2 a.m., staring at the ceiling, replaying the warehouse scene on an endless loop. The sound of impact. The man's screams. Bradley's cold, calculating stillness. She should be packing. Should be calling someone, anyone, who existed in the normal world where violence didn't masquerade as protection. Instead, she got up and went looking for him. She found Bradley in his home office, the door cracked open, warm light spilling into the dark hallway. He sat behind a massive mahogany desk, still wearing his dress shirt and slacks from earlier, sleeves rolled to his elbows. A leather-bound ledger lay open before him, columns of numbers filling the pages. A glass of whiskey sat untouched at his elbow, amber liquid catching the lamplight. He didn't look up when she entered. You should be sleeping. I can't. Betty closed the door behind her, leaning against it. Every time I close my eyes, I see... I know. He set down his pen, finally meeting her gaze. That's why I didn't want you there. But you let me come anyway. You asked. His expression was unreadable. And I'm tired of people making decisions for women based on what they think those women can handle. Betty moved further into the room, drawn by something she couldn't name. Minji. Minji, he confirmed. Everyone decided she was too fragile to burden with the truth, too delicate to handle reality, so we all pretended everything was fine until she decided death was easier than pretending. His jaw tightened. I won't make that mistake with you. She stopped at the edge of his desk, her fingers tracing the leather ledger's embossed edge. Are you a good person, Bradley? No. The answer came without hesitation, without apology. But you protect people, Betty pressed. You protected me. Protecting you doesn't make me good, it makes me selfish. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. I protect what's mine. That's survival instinct, not morality. What if I said I needed you to be good? Then I'd tell you to leave. His voice was soft but firm. Because I can give you safety, wealth, anything you want in this world. But I can't give you a clean conscience. That man in the warehouse tonight won't be the last. There will be others. There will be decisions that require violence, and I won't hesitate. Betty's throat tightened. And if I can live with that? Then you need to ask yourself what that says about you. Bradley stood, moving around the desk until he was close enough to touch. You need to ask yourself if the woman who left Daniel 6 months ago, the woman who believed in right and wrong, in justice and the rule of law, can coexist with the woman who watched a man get beaten tonight and didn't call the police. Maybe those women were never that different, Betty whispered. Maybe. His hand came up, fingers ghosting along her jaw. Or maybe you're becoming someone new. Someone who understands that survival requires compromise. Is that what you tell yourself? That it's all just survival? No. His thumb traced her lower lip. I tell myself that I'm building something my mother and sister never had. A world where the people I love are untouchable. Where power protects instead of destroys. His eyes held hers. I tell myself that if Minji had someone like me, someone willing to cross every line, she'd still be alive. You can't save everyone, Bradley. No. But I can save you. The certainty in his voice broke something open inside her. Betty closed the distance between them and kissed him. Not softly, not tentatively, but with the desperate intensity of someone jumping off a cliff and deciding mid-fall that she wanted to fly. Bradley responded immediately, his hand sliding into her hair, his other arm banding around her waist and pulling her flush against him. He kissed like he did everything else, with absolute control barely containing something wild underneath. Betty's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, trying to crawl inside the safety he represented, even if that safety came wrapped in violence and moral compromise. He deepened the kiss, walking her backward until her spine hit the bookshelf. The contact was electric, overwhelming, exactly what she needed to erase the warehouse from her mind. Bradley pulled back, breathing hard, his forehead pressed against hers. Not like this. Bradley. Not when you're still deciding if you can live with what you saw tonight. His voice was rough, strained with the effort of restraint. Not when you're looking for an escape instead of making a choice. I am making a choice. You're running from the truth. He stepped back, putting space between them that felt like miles. And I won't let you use me to hide from it. Betty's chest heaved, her body protesting the sudden absence of his touch. What if I want to hide? Then I'll let you, tomorrow, next week. His expression softened fractionally. But tonight you need to sit with what you saw. You need to decide if the life I'm offering is one you can actually live, not just one that feels safe in the moment. He took her hand, his fingers warm and solid around hers, and led her out of the office. They walked in silence down the hallway to the guest suite. At the door, he stopped. I'm not a good man, Betty, he said again, quieter now. But I'd burn this whole city down before I let anyone hurt you again. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressed a kiss to her knuckles that felt more intimate than anything else they'd shared. When you're ready, when you've decided this is really what you want, come find me. He kissed her forehead, gentle and devastating, then turned and walked away. Betty stood in the doorway, watching him disappear back toward his office, her body still humming with want, and her mind spinning with the impossible weight of the choice ahead. She touched her lips, still tingling from his kiss, and knew with terrible certainty that she'd already decided. She just needed to admit it to herself, first. The pounding on the door came at 4 a.m., aggressive and official, the kind of knocking that announced authority before words did. Betty jerked awake, disoriented, her heart already racing. For a confused moment, she thought it was Daniel, that the warehouse and Bradley's protection had all been a dream. LAPD, open up! She stumbled to the door in the oversized t-shirt she slept in, her hands shaking as she checked the peephole. A woman in a blazer stood flanked by 2 uniformed officers, all 3 wearing expressions that suggested this wasn't a friendly visit. Betty opened the door. Can I help you? The woman held up a badge. Detective Maria Torres, LAPD, Betty Gonzalez? Yes? You need to come with us. We have questions regarding your relationship with Bradley Smith. Torres's eyes were sharp, assessing. You can come voluntarily, or I can make this official. Your choice. Betty's mouth went dry. I need to call. You can call a lawyer from the station. Torres stepped forward, her presence filling the doorway. Right now, you need to get dressed. 5 minutes. Betty dressed in a fog, pulling on jeans and a sweater with numb fingers. By the time she emerged, another figure had appeared in the hallway. Jay, his scarred face impassive, but his eyes tracking every movement the officers made. She needs to contact Mr. Smith, Jay said, his accent thick. "Mr. Smith can reach out to his lawyer," Torres replied coolly. "Ms. Gonzalez is coming with us." The precinct was exactly what Betty had seen in movies: fluorescent lights, the smell of bad coffee, the ambient noise of a city's overnight chaos being processed. Torres led her to an interrogation room that felt smaller than it probably was. Walls painted institutional beige. A table bolted to the floor. "Am I under arrest?" Betty asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Not yet." Torres sat across from her, spreading a manila folder across the table. "That depends on how cooperative you are." She pulled out the first photo, surveillance footage of Bradley entering a warehouse. The timestamp read 3 weeks ago. Then another photo. Bradley leaving what looked like a nightclub, flanked by his men. More photos. Financial records with numbers Betty couldn't make sense of. Bank transfers, shell corporations, lists of properties. "Bradley Smith," Torres said, her voice clinical, "is the head of one of the largest criminal organizations in Los Angeles. Racketeering, extortion, money laundering, illegal gambling operations." She tapped the photos. "We've been building a case against him for 2 years." Betty's hands clenched in her lap. "I don't know anything about—" "You live in his property. You work for his company. You're with him almost every day." Torres leaned forward. "You know something, Ms. Gonzalez. The question is whether you're going to tell me voluntarily, or if I'm going to charge you as an accessory." "I'm a graphic designer. I do branding work." Torres pulled out another set of photos, and Betty's breath stopped. Hospital intake photos. Daniel Reeves, his face barely recognizable, swollen, bruised, one eye completely shut. His hands wrapped in casts. More photos showing his torso, mottled with bruises that looked deliberately placed. "Daniel Reeves," Torres said. "Admitted to Cedars-Sinai 3 weeks ago. Multiple fractures to both hands, 8 breaks total. 3 broken ribs. Facial trauma requiring reconstructive surgery." She looked up. "He told the hospital he fell downstairs. The doctors didn't believe him. Neither do I." Betty's vision swam. She'd known Bradley had done something, but this— "Your ex-boyfriend was beaten within an inch of his life," Torres continued. "And 48 hours before it happened, you were seen entering Bradley Smith's vehicle. Witnesses at the brew house say Smith confronted Reeves, then took him outside." She paused. "He did this because of you. I didn't ask him to." "But you knew." Torres's voice sharpened. "You knew what he was capable of, and you stayed. You moved into his property. You accepted his money." She spread more documents across the table. Bank statements showing Betty's new salary, the rent payments on her old apartment, purchases Betty didn't remember making. "He's been taking care of you. And in return, you've been protecting him. That's not—" "Here's how this works." Torres pulled out a small recording device, set it on the table between them. "You help us. You wear a wire, gather evidence, testify about what you've seen and heard. In exchange, we grant you immunity. You walk away clean." Betty stared at the device. It was smaller than her phone, innocuous looking. "Or," Torres continued, "you refuse to cooperate, and I charge you as an accessory to assault, money laundering, and racketeering. You're looking at 10 to 15 years, Ms. Gonzalez." She let that sink in. "You seem like a smart woman. You got out of one abusive relationship. Don't let Bradley Smith trap you in another." "He's not—" Betty started, then stopped. Because what could she say? That Bradley wasn't abusive because he never hit her? He just orchestrated violence on her behalf. That he wasn't trapping her because she was choosing to stay. He's not what? Torres leaned back. Not dangerous? We both know that's a lie. Not controlling? He's tracking your every movement, managing your finances, isolating you from your old life. Her voice softened fractionally. I've seen this before. Powerful men who wrap control in protection, who make women feel like they can't survive without them. Betty thought about the warehouse, about Bradley's cold detachment as Jay worked, about the way he'd kissed her forehead and walked away, giving her choice even as he made it clear she was his. "I need to think," Betty said. "You have 24 hours. Torres stood, collecting her photos. "After that, I'm coming back with an arrest warrant." She paused at the door. "Bradley Smith destroys everything he touches, Ms. Gonzalez. The question is whether you're going to let him destroy you too." The door closed with a hollow sound that echoed in Betty's chest. She sat alone in the interrogation room, surrounded by evidence of Bradley's violence, his control, his carefully constructed criminal empire. And all she could think was, "I need to get back to him." Dawn was breaking over Los Angeles when Park pulled up to the Los Feliz compound. Betty had called from the precinct, her voice hollow, and he'd come without questions. The entire drive back, she'd rehearsed what she would say, how she would ask, what she needed to know. But when she walked into the penthouse, all her practiced words dissolved. Bradley stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, still dressed in the clothes from the night before, a cup of coffee cooling on the table beside him. He didn't turn when she entered, but his shoulders tensed, the only indication he'd heard her. "They showed me everything," Betty said to his back. "I know." His voice was carefully neutral. "Torres called my lawyer an hour ago, courtesy warning before she comes for me. Daniel's in the hospital, both hands broken, 3 ribs, his face." Her voice cracked. "Bradley, his face is destroyed." "Yes." He finally turned, and his expression was exactly what she expected. No apology, no regret, just the cold calculation of a man who'd weighed the costs and decided they were worth it. "I gave the order." The admission hung between them, stark and unadorned. "Why?" Betty's hands shook. "You said you'd warned him, that he'd been driven out of the city. He came back." Bradley's jaw tightened. 2 days after we dropped him at that bus station, he was spotted at a bar in Silver Lake, drunk, telling anyone who'd listen about the psycho Korean who'd threatened him, saying he'd make me pay, saying he'd make you pay. Betty's breath caught. "Jay brought me the report," Bradley continued, his voice flat. "Daniel was planning to come back for you. Not immediately, but eventually, when he thought I'd stopped watching." He moved closer, and Betty saw something dangerous flash in his eyes. "So I made sure he understood that there is no eventually, that there is no moment when I stop watching, that even thinking your name would cost him." "You could go to prison," Betty whispered. "Torres has evidence, witnesses, hospital records." "I know. Then why?" "Because some things are worth the risk." He said it like it was obvious, like the calculus was simple. "You're worth the risk." Betty's throat closed. "Bradley, I can't let you don't get to let me do anything." He crossed to his desk, pulled open a drawer, and extracted a leather portfolio. "I made my choice the moment you sat on my lap in that parking garage. Everything after has been consequence." He laid the portfolio on the coffee table, flipped it open. Inside were documents, legal documents with official seals and notarized signatures. "This is a trust fund," Bradley said, pointing to the first document. $3 million, managed by an independent firm. It's in your name, has been for 2 weeks. Betty stared at the numbers, her vision blurring. "These are property deeds. The guest house you're living in, a condo in Santa Monica, a rental property in Pasadena." He turned pages with clinical efficiency. "All transferred to your name, free and clear. Bradley. Stock certificates, shares in legitimate companies, tech, real estate, pharmaceuticals, current value approximately $2 million. He looked up, his eyes holding hers. "And this is a letter to my lawyer with instructions to liquidate my remaining legal assets and transfer them to you if I'm arrested." Betty couldn't breathe. "Why are you showing me this?" Because Torres gave you 24 hours to decide whether to testify against me. His voice was steady, matter of fact. And I want you to know that whatever you choose, you're protected. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, see the exhaustion in the lines around his eyes. If they take me, you're set for life. You never have to be afraid again. Not of Daniel, not of eviction notices, not of wondering if you'll eat next week. You're trying to buy my silence, Betty said, but even she heard how weak it sounded. No. Bradley's hand came up, cupping her face with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with everything she'd learned about him. I'm trying to give you freedom. Real freedom. The kind that comes with choices. His thumb traced her cheekbone. If you want to testify, testify. If you want to take the immunity deal and walk away, walk away. If you want to burn my card in front of Torres and pretend you never knew me, do it. And you just accept that? No. A sad smile curved his lips. I'd be destroyed. But I'd accept it. He paused. Because the alternative, you staying out of obligation or fear or because you think you owe me something, that would destroy me more. Betty looked at the documents spread across the table, at the cold evidence of wealth she'd never imagined having, at the proof that Bradley had prepared for his own downfall and spent his time making sure she'd survive it. Minji didn't have this, she said quietly. Bradley's expression cracked, just for a moment. No. She had nothing. And when her world collapsed, she chose the only escape she could see. His voice roughened. I won't let that be your story, even if it means I become the villain in it. Something broke open in Betty's chest. Not the wall she'd built to protect herself from Daniel, but something deeper. The part of her that had learned not to trust grand gestures, not to believe in protection that came without price. Bradley wasn't offering her safety in exchange for her silence. He was offering her freedom in exchange for nothing at all. Torres wants me to wear a wire, Betty said. To the charity gala next week. She says if I get you talking about your business dealings, it's enough for an arrest. Bradley nodded slowly. That would do it. She says you destroy everything you touch. She's not wrong. Betty reached past him, gathering the legal documents, stacking them carefully. Then she walked to the fireplace, decorative, gas-powered, but with a real flame dancing in the grate. She held the portfolio over the fire. Betty? Bradley's voice held a warning. If I'm going to choose you, Betty said, watching the edges of the paper begin to curl and blacken, I'm going to choose you. Not your money, not your protection, not your guilt over Minji. She let the portfolio drop into the flames. Just you. The documents caught quickly, expensive paper transformed into ash and smoke. She turned to face him, and for the first time since the parking garage, she felt certain. I'm not wearing a wire. I'm not testifying. I'm not taking Torres's deal. Bradley stared at her like he couldn't quite process what she'd just done. You just burned your safety net. No. Betty closed the distance between them. I just chose mine. She kissed him, not with the desperation of the night before, but with clarity, with choice, with the full knowledge of what he was and what being with him meant. When she pulled back, Bradley's hands were shaking where they gripped her waist. You're sure, he said, and it wasn't quite a question. I'm terrified, Betty corrected. But yes, I'm sure. His forehead dropped to hers, his breath warm against her lips. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret this. You'd better, Betty said, because I just committed felony obstruction of justice for you. Bradley's laugh was quiet, almost broken. Welcome to the dark side, Hermosa. I think I've been here for a while, Betty admitted. I just needed to stop pretending I wasn't. 3 months later, Betty stepped out of the Mercedes, wearing a custom burgundy gown that moved like liquid shadow. The dress had been Bradley's idea, Or rather, his insistence. "If you're going to walk into that gala on my arm," he'd said, "you're going to look like you own the room." The Century City Annual Charity Gala was exactly the kind of event Betty had once imagined from the outside. Crystal chandeliers, champagne towers, women dripping in diamonds and men in tuxedos that cost more than cars. Bradley's hand was warm and steady at the small of her back as they entered, his presence transforming her from observer to participant. They'd barely cleared the entrance when Betty saw her. Detective Maria Torres stood near the security checkpoint, not in her usual blazer but in evening wear that didn't quite hide the badge clipped to her clutch. Their eyes met across the marble foyer, and Torres moved with purpose. "Ms. Gonzalez?" Torres's voice was professionally courteous, but her eyes were hard. "Mr. Smith, enjoying the evening?" "We just arrived," Bradley said smoothly. "Detective, Torres, still working, I see." "Someone has to." Torres's gaze fixed on Betty. "Ms. Gonzalez, could I have a word? Privately?" Betty felt Bradley tense beside her, but she touched his arm lightly. "It's fine. I'll just be a moment." Torres led her to an alcove away from the crowd, her expression shifting from professional to almost pleading. "This is your last chance, Betty. The case is moving forward with or without you, but your testimony could—" "Could what?" Betty interrupted. "Put him away? Destroy what we've built? Save you." Torres stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I've seen the financial records. I know how deep you are now, but witness protection is still on the table. New identity, new city, a chance to start over. I don't want to start over." Betty's voice was calm, certain. "I want the life I have. With a criminal. With the man I love." Betty met Torres's gaze without flinching. "I know what you think of me. I know what I've become in your eyes. But I'm not a victim who needs saving, Detective. I made my choice with full knowledge of the consequences." Torres's jaw tightened. "He'll destroy you eventually. Men like him always do." "Maybe." Betty's lips curved slightly. "Or maybe we'll destroy each other in the best possible way." She adjusted her clutch. "I have nothing to say to you, Detective. Enjoy your evening." She walked away before Torres could respond, returning to Bradley's side. His eyes searched her face, a question he didn't need to voice. "It's done," Betty said quietly. "She knows I'm not flipping." Bradley's hand found hers, squeezed once. "Then let's make this a night worth the trouble." The gala was held in a rooftop garden, with views of the city sprawling below, like a carpet of stars. Betty networked with Bradley's business associates, some legitimate, some less so, and found herself surprisingly comfortable in the role. She was no longer the woman who'd run from Daniel in a parking garage. She'd become someone new, someone who understood power and how to wield it. As midnight approached, Bradley leaned close. "Come with me." He led her away from the crowd to the garden's edge, where fairy lights tangled with jasmine vines, and the city hummed below. The music from the ballroom was distant, intimate. "Betty Gonzalez," Bradley said, and something in his tone made her breath catch. He lowered himself to one knee and the world seemed to tilt. From his pocket he produced a velvet box. Inside was a ring unlike anything Betty had ever seen. A brilliant diamond beside a black pearl, set in platinum, the two stones creating a perfect balance of light and shadow. "I can't promise you a safe life," Bradley said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "I can't promise there won't be more warehouses, more difficult choices, more nights where you question whether this is worth it." He paused. "But I can promise you'll never face any of it alone. I can promise that every day I will choose you, protect you, love you with everything I have." Betty's vision blurred with tears she didn't try to hide. "The diamond is for the woman you were," Bradley continued, "the one who believed in light and justice and doing the right thing. The black pearl is for the woman you've become, someone who understands that survival sometimes requires shadow." His thumb traced the ring. Together they're perfect. Like us. Bradley. Marry me, Betty. Choose this life. Choose me. Choose us. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. Let me spend forever making sure you never regret it. Betty sank to her knees in front of him, not caring about the expensive dress or the perfectly styled hair. She framed his face with her hands, seeing everything clearly. The danger, the darkness, the violence, but also the protection, the devotion, the man who'd prepared to lose everything to keep her safe. Yes, she said. Yes to all of it. Bradley slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into a kiss that tasted like champagne and promises, and the beautiful, terrible future they'd chosen together. 2 years later, the Malibu house sat on a cliff overlooking the Pacific, all glass and clean lines, and the kind of peace Betty had once thought existed only in magazines. She stood on the deck, one hand resting on her swollen belly, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. Bradley's arms came around her from behind, his hand covering hers on their unborn daughter's restless movements. She's active tonight. She takes after her father, Betty said, leaning back into his warmth. Refuses to be still. Or her mother? Bradley's lips brushed her temple. Stubborn, fierce, perfect. In the 2 years since the gala, Bradley had systematically dismantled most of his illegal operations. It hadn't been easy. Exit strategies rarely were. But he'd leveraged, negotiated, and occasionally threatened his way into legitimacy. Now his empire consisted of import-export businesses that actually imported and exported legal goods, real estate developments that didn't launder money, and investments that generated wealth without violence. Betty's design firm had thrived, her client list growing to include the same people who'd once seemed unreachable. She'd built something that was entirely hers, success earned rather than given. Do you ever miss it? Betty asked quietly. The power, the fear. Bradley was silent for a long moment. Sometimes, he admitted, the same way you might miss a scar, not the wound, but the reminder of who you were when you got it. His hand moved in slow circles on her belly. But this? You, our daughter? This life we're building? This is better than power ever was. Detective Torres would say we got away with it. Detective Torres would be right. Bradley turned her to face him. But getting away with it doesn't mean escaping it. We carry everything we did, every choice, every consequence. The difference is we chose to carry it, together. Betty looked up at her husband. Because he was her husband now, in every legal and moral sense, and saw the truth of it. They hadn't redeemed themselves. They hadn't erased their sins or pretended to be people they weren't. They'd simply decided their past didn't own their future. I love you, Betty said. Even knowing everything. Maybe because I know everything. I love you, Bradley replied, for staying, for choosing, for burning those documents and deciding I was worth the risk. Their daughter kicked hard, as if agreeing with the sentiment. Betty laughed, the sound carrying out over the ocean. Somewhere in Los Angeles, Daniel was rebuilding his life. Detective Torres was chasing other criminals. The warehouse still stood in San Pedro, a monument to choices made in darkness. But here, on this cliff, with the sun setting and their future growing inside her, Betty Gonzalez-Smith felt something she'd never expected. Peace. Not the peace of innocence, but the peace of acceptance. Of knowing exactly who she was, and choosing to be that person anyway. Bradley kissed her as the last light faded from the sky, and Betty kissed him back, tasting salt air and promise and the beautiful, complicated truth of their love. They'd found their ending. Not the one anyone would have written for them, but the one they'd fought for, bled for, chosen for themselves. And it was perfect. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.